Welcome to our 10th meetup, Synedge meetup. Today we have a packed agenda again. We have, at the beginning, Ruben from the Synedge team giving us the latest news and updates and in the first slot. In the second slot, we have Christoph from Turk with us, presenting how automation use cases are implemented leveraging Synedge. And finally, we have Sean Thomas from Solenis talking about standardized device connectivity. Some words to the meeting setup and housekeeping rules. First of all, the meeting will be recorded. So if you cannot attend full time, I will send out the recordings later on so we can watch the slots or the full meeting afterwards. Also, I would ask you to keep your microphones muted unless we will have an open Q&A session. For the first slot, we will not have a Q&A session because it's mainly about Synedge updates, but in the end of the whole meeting, we are open for questions to also talk about the latest Synedge innovations. For the slots of Christoph and Sean's, we have a Q&A after each session. If you have, during the session, questions, please use the chat and write the questions in the chat. I will try to read them out loud after the session or in the end of the Q&A, in the Q&A session. That's everything already from my side. Let's have a nice meetup, and I hand over to you, Ruben.
Yeah, thanks. So let me steal the presentation. Just confirm when you can see it, make sure everything's working. Cool. So hi, everyone. My name's Ruben Miller. I'm the product owner for Synedge. So you probably see my face around. I do a lot of these demos. So I just wanted to give a bit of a catch up what we've been doing in Synedge recently. So I kind of wanted to walk you through like how you discover these things yourself, rather than create slides and everything, which wouldn't be available online. So like any release, a great place to start out is our GitHub repository, where we have all of our code. There's no hidden code at all within Synedge. Everything's open source, so you can navigate it yourself. So we use a lot of the GitHub functionality. So if we go to the releases section, you can kind of see what's already been happening with a lot of releases to date, and then you can read a bit about what's included in them. So we usually have like a highlight section to kind of like promote, maybe special features that we think will be extra interesting to users. But basically, I always recommend reading all of the features and bug fixes, because something that might not be interesting for all users could definitely be super interesting for you. So definitely recommend going through that. So I wanted to pick out some of the 1.6.x releases, like features from this release. But I didn't want to kind of explain everything. I wanted to show it in a real demo. So I'm going to be showing some of the features like the Comvelocity certificate authority integration that we already did have that. And I believe I showed that in the last community meetup, but it's coming into GA, so it kind of warrants a little bit of repeating it. Then the HSM integration. So we've extended that to also support renewing certificates. And again, that works hand in hand with the certificate authority feature of Comvelocity. And then to give a bit of a demo about the diagnostic command that we've built, how to get diagnostic information from Synedge, because that also helps you support your customers. And also if you're looking for support for your Synedge installation, it's a great kind of extension point. So for this demo, I've decided, so with Synedge, we're very, very flexible with how you deploy Synedge, because not only freedom of choice means not just features that Synedge needs to deliver, but how you deploy Synedge. So whether it is running natively on your host system, running in a container, running on top of an already built image, or including it in your built image, we support everything. So for this kind of example, I've chosen to build my own operating system image because I want to be in control of everything. So I want to have like a TPM2 chip there. So I need TPM2 drivers and all that kind of stuff. So I basically followed all these instructions to build an OS image using Yocto, one of the industry standards for building custom operating systems for embedded devices. So I've done that. The only preparation I've done for this demo is I built the image and flashed it on the device. Nothing more than that. So let's start out by connecting via SSH to my device. So you can see it's the first time I'm connecting. It's going, hey, do you trust this fingerprint? I'll go, yes. So we can see it's a Yocto-based image. So this is a custom Linux distribution. So we're not talking Debian anymore. I can control every aspect of this image. So because I know this device that I want to kind of deploy it on, I've customized it to my use case. So this means I have ThinEdge installed out of the box, because this is part of my operating system image. I've enabled AB updates on this. So in this example, I'm actually using Rugex to facilitate the AB updates. But as said before, I also want a TPM2 chip. So a TPM2 is a hardware security module, which is basically a fancy way to say we can store your private secrets, or in this case, a private key of a certificate, securely in a hardware-based module that no one can steal. So it just improves the security story of my device, so I can be sure no one can run off with my private key. So we can probably see here, list slots, so I think it's tokens. But here I'm using an Infineon TPM2 chip. And I believe if you're using a Rev Pi, I believe they're also using an Infineon chip, maybe even this exact model. So I'm using a Raspberry Pi in this instance, so I have just the chip installed on that. So now the question is, how do I actually then get started? So I already have ThinEdge installed, but I haven't connected it to anything. So if I just, to prove that I don't have anything, so none of my URLs are configured, so I'm not connected to any cloud. Now I want to connect to a cloud. So with HSMs, there is a little bit of a setup that you have to do once, because you have to configure a pin and all this kind of stuff. So just to make that easier, in this kind of the base image that we have, part of our Yocto stuff, that we have an initialization script just to help you out. So here we have a few parts. I'm telling what kind of HSM I'm using, because different HSMs has slightly different interfaces. So here I'm using TPM2. I'm specifying what Comlocity tenant I want to connect to. So this will by default then use the Comlocity CA feature. So to issue the certificate to the device. And again, this is kind of part of HSMs. I need to give it kind of what do I reference the HSM with? Because that's part of the initialization process. So all I need to do is then enter. It's going to generate the key for me in the HSM. I still have no access to the certificate or the private key. And then it prints out this nice little URL. So let me just click on that. Okay, it's brought me to Comlocity. I was already logged into Comlocity, so I had some cookies. My device is registered. How easy was that? So we go back to the device to see it kind of in action. So what's happened, it's contacted Comlocity. It's asked for a certificate. So it has this one-time password exchange to securely download the certificate. Once it receives the certificate, it then checks, are you actually valid? And then proceeds with the configuration, the connection tests, validates everything's successful, and you can see everything's happy. So I'm connected with this device. So if I go back to Comlocity, just to show it's not all smoke and mirrors, I can see my device newly registered. So creation, a minute ago or now. And then we see all of the out-of-the-box functionality that we have available. So you can see, I won't go through all the features, but you can just see for the extensive list. So we can see that it's firmware, what firmware base image, because I've built it with Rugex. So I can track in this kind of semantic version that I've given it for the image that is deployed on the device. So if I want to do a firmware update securely, doing an AB kind of update, I could do it comfortably from Comlocity. Then you can have all of list of services. So I can even see here, I have the Tedge container plugin. So I could even deploy containers, like a Node-RED kind of deployment or whatever containers you want, the OPC UA device gateway, conveniently from Comlocity. And just to prove it is the same device, so if I do the same kind of cat on the ETC, host file, we see here that this is, in fact, my Yocto version. So let's go back on the device and then have a bit of a poke around, because when you're using new things, it's natural not to trust it. So you're going, did you actually use the TPM2 chip, for instance? So let's have a poke around. So if I just look at my certificate information, so we have a lot of CLI tools which make all of this really convenient. You can also wrap this in your own kind of scripts. So here we see, I just want to see the certificate information. So as before, the public certificate is still stored on disk because that is public information. There's no kind of security risk if that gets leaked. I can see here that I'm actually using Comlocity CA because of the issuer. So it's Comlocity, and that's actually the tenant that issued the certificate. So that's great. I can track it there and then get some meta information about when it expires, etc. So I'll just switch back to the UI because I forgot to show the X509. So if we look at that same information, this is the certificate that got issued to the device. So this is the meta information. So you can also check this from the cloud to see when it will expire, to see if you need to do any kind of action to renew it quickly. But I mean, if you're deploying this stuff to devices, who's doing renewals manually, right? So you want all of this stuff to happen automatically. So we can already see that everything's valid. Cool. I'm satisfied here. But let's just check whether I actually have a private key stored on disk or not. So if I just look at the directory where the public certificate is stored, for those ThinEdge users who have been around a bit longer, you would have noticed the absence of the private certificate. So that's no longer in here because it's actually stored on within the HSM module. So I can be happy that there's no kind of risk of exposure here. I can use the private key through the HSM interface that it provides to then establish my secure communication to the cloud, but I don't get direct access to the bytes of the certificate. So that's basically the best security you can get. Best is no access. So now, let's fast forward a little bit in time and going, well, now I have a certificate. What happens with certificate renewal? So the great thing out of the box, we have a TEDge cert renewer, CLI.timer. So we have a timer and a service. So the timer will automatically run periodically and then check, is the certificate about to expire? This expiration time limit is then defined and configurable. So I think the default is 30 days, but you can increase this as kind of to your liking, to your use case. Really depends on, how long will a device be offline for. So if you have a device that could be offline for a month at a time, then you basically want this renewal period to at least be 2 times that maximum offline period as a rule of thumb. So here, everything's fine because I just have still 364 days. So I don't really need to worry about it. But this will do automatically. So in the normal set of constants, you don't have to do anything to do with certificate renewal. But then you always says, normally you don't have to do this. What happens if I need to do this for whatever business reason? Maybe you're about to ship the device to a customer and the customer could have a 6-month window where they don't boot it up for whatever reason. And you want to kind of maximize certificates lifespan. So like with anything, so under the hood, the certificate renewal service is running all these certificate commands as is. So we can actually trigger it manually if you need to do an ad hoc kind of renewal. So let's do that. So renew, let's use a bit of tab completion because it is very helpful. So I want to renew the Comlocity or renew it via Comlocity. And I have a second certificate. Again, you'll notice I didn't have to worry about anything with TPMs. ThinEdge took care of all of that for me. So this is fantastic. So the renewal for the certificate is exactly the same with the TPM module or not. So this means if you have a heterogeneous fleet, so some have a TPMs and some don't, then for your engineers or the operators, it's exactly the same command. So it just kind of simplifies the whole thing. So ThinEdge abstracts that for you. Just the initialization, which is slightly different. But then after that, it's all the same. So it's also easy to write those kind of instruction manuals to your customers. But you'll notice that once I've renewed it, it isn't actually active yet So this is also part of our kind of robust thinking within Edge, that let's not assume that everything just works. So we've got a new certificate, but we don't yet trust it because, or we don't yet know whether it's can be used to establish a connection to the cloud. So it's just kind of like a candidate that we can use. So let's reconnect here. And then in the output, we'll see a bit more information that's saying the reconnect command has then detected that there's a new certificate candidate on disk, so the public certificate, and going, well, actually, I'm going to check whether that works. And if it does, I'll switch over to that. So if this validation phase fails, it will just, the reconnect will fail, but you'll revert back to the original certificate. So you can kind of have a bit of checks and balances there. So you don't overwrite the existing certificate till you've proven it works. So again, fundamental for robustness on a, especially with IoT devices. So again, if we go back to the UI, and I just click reload here, magic, we have a second issued certificate. So that is now the valid certificate and the one being used by ThinEdge. So all of that's a seamless kind of integration, and it really showcases the Velocity CA feature, which is also going into GA this quarter. Okay, so let's go on to the second bit where we're looking at the diagnostic information. So during the operation of ThinEdge, at time to time, there will be something you need to debug, like any application, or maybe you have a difficult device, which 99% of your fleet works, but that 1% is problematic for unknown reasons. It's it's just the reality of that, especially if you have large fleets. So what we decided to do was, well, can we make people's lives easier? Because the system, or like ThinEdge, also has a lot of information, a lot of ways it can be used. So one of, like, whenever we received a customer ticket, we're going, well, how are you using it? We need a bit of like a context here. And that was always a little bit difficult to communicate to some customers because, different skill sets. So we decided to build a command that just says diag collect. So all that's doing is running, so we have some out-of-the-box diagnostic scripts, which then collect information, whether it's settings, operating system information, whatever. And then we just collect it into a location, which it is then created as a compressed file, which is then spit out. We're not doing anything with it yet. So you can imagine that, if you automatically try to upload it to Comvelocity, the problem might be that you have a misconfiguration, which is preventing it to connect to Comvelocity. So we don't assume you have connection to Comvelocity. However, the natural step is, well, what happens if I want connection to Comvelocity? So I want to upload this to Comvelocity. Do we support it? Absolutely. So we can do the same thing, and again, using all of the inbuilt commands. So let's do some one-liner magic here. So I want to do a collection, but I want to maybe try to upload it to Comvelocity if I can. If it fails, oh well, I can try to do a manual transfer or something. If we go to Comvelocity now on the events, so that command will be uploading, creating the event, and then uploading a binary to it. So in this case, it's the tarball, and I can download it. And inside it has all the information that was then collected. So I can see the operating system information, where I can then go, okay, you're using a Yocto release, which is good for context. So I know, okay, you probably can't run apt commands, and you're probably using AV update system. To the ThinEdge settings, so you get all the information, what kind of context, are you using a proxy, and all this kind of stuff. So all of that is then useful to kind of show and debug the system. So one of the advantages is, so each of the plugins you can either like write to the output. So you'll notice if you just have a simple kind of plugin, you're not really creating files or anything. You're just kind of like printing stuff to the console. So by default, we will log that for you. So you don't need to think about, where do I put this file? But if you have more advanced use cases like this first one of ThinEdge, you can also have a file location that you can then put things in if you need to, like, for example, here, copy the TEDGTOML file. So you can also preserve things as files, and that will get transported in there. So the next next step that we thought, well, wouldn't this be great if customers could also then do their own logic? Because ThinEdge is a core part of your IoT solution, but not the only part of your IoT solution. You're going to have business applications that are mission critical for your device or your customers, so you might need to get diagnostic information from them as well. So the great thing is, if you read our documentation available here, you can add your own plugins with that, and we'll execute them under the diag collect command. So these can be really, really basic, or you can do something a little bit more complex. So let's just take a really simple example. And I'm just going to, so maybe I'm communicating with external system, and I have always had issues with understanding the trusted CAs on my device. What are the root CAs? And maybe it's preventing me from connecting to some third-party server, like AWS or something. So maybe I just want to collect some meta information about that. So let's do that, and so maybe we just need a list of the CA certificates on the device. So these are the root certificates, generally typically for establishing trust with the cloud. So I'm just going to make that executable. And then if I run the same command again, so I can see all the output here, that everything's kind of like working nicely. And you see that my CA certificates is also there. And so again, if we jump in the UI and download it, we can see magically that we have the list of CA certificates. So it's just meta information for now. So it says, the date, it shows you a bit of like the hashes, but you can still get some like information up there. Obviously, you could also like cat the whole CA certificates.cit file if you wanted a actual what are the values of the public certificates. But it just shows it's quite easy to extend, so you can then include these scripts as part of your base image. So hopefully some of those are just a glimpse of this ongoing continuous kind of features that we're bringing into ThinEdge all the time, and the mindset that we show that we're not just thinking about stuff that makes our lives easier, that there's a lot of overlap to make our customers' lives easier. And this flexibility to customize things to your liking is at the forefront of any of our design. So there's a lot of other things going on, like a lot of, so maybe a particular shout out, because I think it shows a great example. I know I'm probably a bit over time now. So the Modbus plugin, so recently we've had a lot of external contributors here. So it's great to show kind of some of the benefits of the open source model. So for our plugins, so this is a Python-based Modbus plugin. So we had an external contributor to add Modbus RTU support, and also doing some combinations, so batching of measurements, to some also other Cumulocity employees to add like writing of operation handlers for writing coils and writing registers. So it just shows you a few kind of contributions. So if you're also not a Rust person or something, so you can also look at contributing to some of the other kind of plugins that we have available. So with that, I'll hand over back to you, Stefan.